Today I want to share with you how to make superfood smoothies with this simple formula, so they'll be both delicious and nutritious. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broth, ferment, sourdough, and more. So if you enjoy learning about those things, consider subscribing to my channel and don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. Well, during the summer, when it's warm outside and exceptionally warm here in Central Texas, we love to make smoothies. But just not any type of smoothie. We really like to make superfood smoothies. So they're a complete meal that we can have at breakfast, and that'll be filling enough to tide us over to lunch, or if we have it for lunch, it'll be filling enough to tide us over till dinner. Now, the first thing I want to mention is that if you open the description below underneath this video, you'll see timestamps that'll cover everything that I'm going to talk about, as well as the smoothies that I'm going to make, so that if you want to jump around, it's easy for you to do so. Plus, you don't need to write anything down, because when you open that description, you're also going to see the word recipe. And if you click on the link next to that, it'll take you over to my website, Mary's Nest, same name as my YouTube channel, where you can read the recipes online or print them out. Plus, when you're over on my website, I have a printout for you. It's completely free and no email required. You can print out as many copies as you need, and that'll have all the steps involved in making a superfood smoothie that you can check off, as well as a place where you can write in what you used so that you can start keeping track of the combinations of smoothies that you like. And as you start using those checklists and writing down the ingredients that you use, you can add that to your kitchen journal so you always have a record of what you like. And if you haven't started making a kitchen journal yet, I have a video where I share mine with you to give you some ideas about starting your own. And I'll be sure to link to that in the iCards and in the description below. And throughout this video, I'm going to be mentioning how to make a lot of the ingredients that you're going to put into your smoothie that can be made homemade. And whenever I mention that, I'll be sure to add links either in the iCards or in the description below, so that you can watch those videos to learn how to make various things homemade. And when it comes to combinations for your smoothies and different recipes, I'm going to share with you the recipes of the combinations that I like the best. But definitely feel free to experiment based on this simple formula that I'm going to share with you. Alrighty, let's get started. Now, for this simple formula, what you need to keep in mind is that there are 5 categories of ingredients that you're going to add to your smoothie to make it a superfood smoothie, and there are 5 steps to follow as to how you put those ingredients together to make your superfood smoothie. Now, before we talk about the ingredients and the steps, I just want to talk about the equipment to use to make a superfood smoothie. Now today, I'm just going to use my plain blender. This is actually probably a good 20 years old now, maybe, but it's just a simple Cuisinart blender, and it works fine for making a smoothie. And I wanted to use a basic blender because I know that's something that most of us have. Now, I also do have a Vitamix blender. It's one of the high-speed blenders, but mine probably looks a little different than the ones you've seen around today. Mine's about 30 years old. And these high-speed blenders, whether you have an old one like me or a modern-day one, whether it's made by Vitamix or one of the other companies that makes high-speed blenders, they work very well at pulverizing everything to really make a super smooth superfood smoothie. And another type of blender that works very well at making smoothies are the Nutri blenders. They often are very good for a single serve smoothie if you've got one of those. But don't worry if you just have a plain blender, because that's what we're going to use today, and you're going to see that the smoothies are going to come out just fine. If you have found, though, that when you add certain ingredients to your smoothie, when you're making one with a lot of maybe seeds or nuts or oatmeal, different ingredients like that, that you have a little trouble getting those really pulverized well, there are a couple of tips I'm going to give you that may help you to get your smoothie even smoother. What you can do is to try to whirl them just dry in your dry blender to break them up somewhat, to pulverize your seeds and your nuts or break up your oats, and try to turn them into powders best you can. Another option is if you have one of these little spice grinders, or sometimes they're used for grinding coffee beans. These can come in very handy, and you can pulverize your oats in here, your chia seeds, your flax seeds, whatever you're using, your nuts. These work terrific. And I know a lot of you, whenever I've used this in videos, a lot of you have asked me about this. And this is a KitchenAid. This is made by KitchenAid. I've had this a little bit for a while now, number of years. If I can find this online, I'll definitely put a link to it. But if not, there's so many of these are made today, and I'm confident that you can find one, and they're usually pretty reasonable. And I highly recommend that you check your thrift store if you have a local thrift store in your area, because I often see these at thrift stores, and I actually have a couple, not the KitchenAid brand. They're made by Braun, B-R-A-U-N, that I've actually found at thrift stores, and they work great too, because I'll have one for spices and one for coffee beans and so on and so forth. Alrighty, so now let's go over the 5 main categories of ingredients that we're going to need to make our smoothie a superfood smoothie, a complete meal smoothie. You're going to want to make sure that you've got some protein in your smoothie, some carbs, carbohydrates in your smoothie, some fats in your smoothie, as well as some fiber in your smoothie, because fiber is what's going to really help keep you full. And the 5th category of ingredients is what I like to call your flavor boosters. Basically, flavor boosters will help bring all the other flavors within your superfood smoothie together to really brighten it and make it very tasty. And the nice thing about these flavor boosters is that they are often superfoods as well. These flavor boosters can bring anti-inflammatory properties into your smoothies. They can bring vitamins and minerals into your smoothies. They can bring a whole host of added benefits to your smoothies. So they do a lot more than just add flavor. Now let's go over these different categories of ingredients. And now keep in mind, you're going to have some overlap, because you may add a particular food that will fill both the category for fat as well as the category for protein. So you can often cover 2 categories with 1 ingredient. Alrighty, let's start with protein. You have a lot of variety when it comes to adding protein to your smoothies. You can use cottage cheese, you can use ricotta, and let me tell you, if you make a smoothie with ricotta, it is going to be like sipping a cheesecake through a straw. You can also use yogurt, and I highly recommend that you make your own yogurt, and I have a video where I show you how to do this. It's very simple, no special equipment required. You just need a bowl, and just make regular old-fashioned plain yogurt. Then you can strain your yogurt so that your final product is similar to a Greek yogurt, but then you have the whey. And the whey is a wonderful liquid, which we'll talk about when we talk about the 5 steps of how to put our smoothie together. But whey is a wonderful liquid to use when making a smoothie because it's very rich in probiotics. And speaking of the cottage cheese and the ricotta, I do have videos where I show you how to make that with printable recipes, so I'll be sure to link to those as well. And if you make your own milk kefir, you can also use that. You can strain that if you want, so that you have like a kefir type cheese, and then you have the kefir whey, which can serve as your liquid, or you can just put the kefir as the liquid base into your smoothie. Whatever you do, kefir is also rich in protein, as well as good probiotics. Another source of protein is nut butters, and you can use any type of nut butter that agrees with you. You can also use whole nuts if you want, and you can soak them the night before as well to help make them more digestible. And if you want to learn more about that, I do have a video where I talk about and show you the process of soaking nuts overnight. And I go into detail as to why that can be beneficial and make them easier to digest. And remember, when you use yogurt or cottage cheese or whatever the case may be, and it's been made from whole milk, it's going to basically cover adding some fat to your smoothie as well as protein. And the same with the nut butters. They're going to bring both fat and protein to the smoothie. So that's just a general overview of some of the different types of proteins that you can add to your smoothie. And as I mentioned, I'll have all of this in the corresponding blog post and the printable recipe where I'll go into a lot of detail about this. Next, you're going to want to think about what carbohydrates that you're going to add to your superfood smoothie. And really, the bottom line is, because it is a smoothie, and most smoothies, as their base, have fruits and vegetables in them, they're really going to serve as your carbohydrates. And when it comes to fruits and vegetables, you really have a wide variety to choose from. But what I recommend is that you freeze both your fruit and or your veggies, whatever you're going to be using in your superfood smoothie, and just cut them up into pieces. I like to put mine into plastic bags and get them sort of flattened out and then just slide them into my freezer. If you have the type of freezer where you can fit in a big cookie sheet so that the pieces freeze individually, that's great, but I just don't have that set up. So what I do is I just put them into plastic bags and I flatten it all out so they basically freeze individually, and it works like a charm. And the reasons are actually twofold why I like to add frozen fruits and vegetables to my smoothies. One is that not having to add extra ice to my smoothie helps it not to be diluted. And second, frozen fruit and veggies are a little easier on my blades in my basic blender as opposed to ice cubes. Now, one tip I want to share when it comes to vegetables. Greens you don't so much have to worry about, although I do enjoy freezing them in little amounts in muffin tin cups, and I find that comes in very handy, and it's just adding extra cold to the smoothie. However, you don't necessarily have to do that. However, I do recommend with other fruits, other vegetables, that in the case of cruciferous vegetables like cauliflower and broccoli, that you either steam them a little bit or parboil them a little bit before you freeze them. If you want, you can even buy frozen broccoli or frozen cauliflower. And the reason when it comes to cruciferous vegetables, they can be very tough and a little chewy when they're raw, and it can also be more difficult for our bodies to assimilate the nutrients from them when they're raw. So just giving them a little bit of a steam or a little bit of a parboil doesn't necessarily destroy any nutrients in them. It actually makes them more digestible and more assimilatable. And so I think that that works much better, and especially if you're using a regular blender, because that little bit of softness that you give them through that very quick cooking process does help make them easier to puree. And I think the same holds true for other vegetables like carrots. If you like adding carrots to your smoothies, giving them a little parboil before you freeze them, or buying frozen carrots can be a very good option. Again, it just makes for us being able to assimilate the nutrients from the carrots a little better, as well as making it a little easier on our blenders. Another tip that I want to share with you when it comes to adding fruits and vegetables together in a smoothie, if you want to do a green smoothie, you're best actually making it a green smoothie. It'll be green in color, and you'll be using a lot of green fruits and vegetables. I don't recommend adding greens to other smoothies that you may be making, ones that are more orange in color or yellow in color or berry color, in a red color or a purple color. And the reason is, often when you add greens to other smoothies, you can wind up with a color that looks very unappetizing. It can almost look gray. So now there's nothing keeping you from adding greens into any smoothie, but if you do that, do be a little conscious of the fact that the color may not be as pleasing as you had hoped for. Okay, next let's talk about fats. Now, if you've used dairy as your protein source and it's made from whole milk, it's going to be a wonderful source of fat. If you've used a nut butter, that's also going to be a wonderful source of fat. But if you've not used those, or you want to add additional fat to your superfood smoothie, then you've got a nice wide variety of options. Avocado is a wonderful source of fat to add to smoothies, and a very popular one that is often added to smoothies. You can also use coconut oil, or some of you I know have shared with me you like to put MCT oil in your smoothies, which is like an extract of coconut oil. I'm not so much a fan of that because I do like more to always use sort of the whole food, the whole coconut oil. But if you're on a particular diet program where you do like to use MCT oil, that blends very well in a smoothie. Also, you may not realize that you can also put a little ghee into a smoothie or even a little butter into a smoothie. But something that I recommend if you use coconut oil or butter or ghee, which tend to be more solid at room temperature, if you warm those and bring them up to a liquid state and then drizzle them down into your smoothie as it's being whirled, and we'll talk a little bit more about this when we go into the 5 steps of how to blend your smoothie so that it really comes out perfect. Bringing those up to a liquid temperature and then drizzling them down into your smoothie will really help them dissolve and not congeal into something that would be unpleasant or getting stuck in your straw. Adding it in that liquid form will keep it liquid and also help, it will emulsify more or less and help your smoothie even become a little thicker. And I want to mention about avocados because you may not need the whole avocado going into your smoothie if you're just making one. And avocados can turn brown very quickly, whether at room temperature or in the refrigerator. So what you can do is just cut up your avocado and go ahead, as I said, put it in pieces in a bag, flatten the bag or on a baking sheet. And you can actually freeze the little chunks of avocado. And I think grocery stores now are even selling chunks of frozen avocado. Now you'd be surprised to know that there are other oils that you can easily add to your smoothie and you're never going to taste it. Olive oil is a wonderful fat to add, especially to green smoothies. You'll never taste it, and olive oil is so good for us. Scientists say it's good for our heart, our skin, everything. So definitely think about adding in some olive oil. Next, you want to think about adding some fiber to your smoothie. Now, yes, the fruits and vegetables do add a lot of fiber, but if you want to even add more fiber, especially if you're trying to use your smoothie as a meal replacement and you want it to really fill you up and hold you until your next meal to prevent snacking, you may want to go ahead and add some extra fiber. So for extra fiber, you may want to think about adding some chia seeds or some flax seeds, which are also both high in omega-3 fats, which scientists tell us are very good for our brain and our heart. Other sources of fiber you can add are psyllium husks, or wheat bran, or oat bran, or old-fashioned rolled oats. You really have a variety of different things that you can add to add extra fiber into your superfood smoothie. Now let's talk about the add-on flavor enhancers. Now what I'm talking about are things like some grated ginger, or even some citrus peel, which is very high in nutrients. You could add a little turmeric, which is very high in anti-inflammatory properties and will be great if you're doing sort of an orange smoothie. Other flavor enhancers can include flavorings like vanilla. You can use vanilla extract, which is very good for the thyroid. And even if you have fresh vanilla beans, you can scrape out the beans and add those into your smoothies. If you're making a chocolate smoothie or a mocha smoothie or a coffee smoothie, you can add in some cacao beans, which are basically what chocolate comes from, and they're very rich in magnesium, which is wonderful for nourishing our nervous system. And something that's really nice about adding cacao beans into your smoothie is that you can put them in at the very end and just swirl them a little bit so that there's still like little bits of chunks in your smoothie and you can eat it with a spoon. And if you like those sort of milkshakes that are like cookies and cream, or ones that have like little peanut butter pieces in them, or different things like that, this can be a nice substitution for something like that, because you're getting that little bit of crunch when you, in essence, eat your smoothie. Things like spirulina and seaweed can be wonderful for adding to green smoothies. They're extremely rich in nutrients. So there are a whole host of these flavor add-on superfood boosters, so to speak, that I will be sure to list in the printable recipes for you to choose from. Alrighty, now we're going to get ready to make a smoothie, and we're going to follow the 5 steps where I'm going to show you is the best way to put these ingredients into your blender to get the smoothest superfood smoothie. Now, I do want to take a minute to just talk about adding sweeteners to smoothies and whether or not they're necessary. For the most part, if you're using very ripe fruit, you really may want to avoid adding extra sweeteners to your smoothie, so that over time our palates and those of our children's palates as well, get used to the sweetness that's brought just by the fruit and not additional sweeteners. However, if you want to add a no-calorie sweetener, the herb stevia can be a good choice. And other sweeteners that do have calories but are also nutrient-rich foods are things like dates, which are wonderful for adding to smoothies because they do bring nutrition and also a bit of sweetness. You can also add other dried fruit like raisins. You can also use maple syrup or honey or sucanat, or sometimes known as rapadura, which is the dried sugarcane juice. So you do have options available to you, and if you do decide to go with these sweeteners that are more nutrient rich as opposed to, say, just adding white sugar, you certainly can do that, but I would definitely try smoothies without any additional sweetener, and then if you feel it needs a little something, start small. Now, the actual amount of smoothie you're going to make will vary slightly depending on how many ingredients you add to your smoothie. But generally, a smoothie can be somewhere between 12 ounces to 16 ounces, with 12 ounces being more likely what you would give to a child, and 16 ounces would be more likely what an adult would want. Now, the first ingredient that you want to add to your blender is your liquid, because this will make it easy on the blender to start mixing everything up. And how much liquid you add can really vary from anywhere from 1/4 cup to a full cup of liquid. If you're using fruits that are already very rich in water, like your melons, or if you're using vegetables like cucumbers, you probably will need less liquid. But you always want to err on the side of using less liquid in general if you like a nice thick smoothie. Because as your smoothie is blending, if you find that it's too thick, it's much easier to add additional liquid than it is to take it away. But if you find that you have added too much liquid, then you can always add a little extra fiber that can help absorb some of that liquid, or a little extra fruit or vegetables. Now, when it comes to adding liquid, you have a lot of options. You can add some juice, but generally, since we are going to be adding fruit, I like to keep the amount of juice to a minimum to not make it overly sweet. So I would recommend that you dilute the juice if you are going to use that. You could also use milk, regular dairy milk, or any of the various alternate milks like oat milk and nut milks. You can even use just plain water. But I want to give you a little tip if you do use water. If you decide you're going to add water for the base of the liquid for your smoothie, you can add anywhere from a teaspoon to a tablespoon of raw apple cider vinegar into that water to up the probiotics that now are going to be in your superfood smoothie. And I have videos on how to make your own apple cider vinegar. It's a 3-part series. I walk you through the whole 30-day process. So if that's something you're interested in, definitely check out that. I'll be sure to link to it. Plus, you can also add a little bit of the liquid from some of your ferments. Something like sauerkraut would work very well. You could take a tablespoon of the liquid, the brine that your sauerkraut is in, and you can add that to your water and add that to your smoothie. You're not going to taste it. It works exceptionally well in green smoothies. It just brings a little bit of flavor to it, but nothing that you're going to really discern as a sauerkraut flavor. And now you have wonderful probiotics in your smoothie, because a tablespoon of the brine from sauerkraut probably has more probiotics in it than a whole bottle full of probiotic capsules. And something that might surprise you, but I have done a video on this in the past, you can also add bone broth or broth to your smoothie as your base for liquid. Chicken broth or chicken bone broth works very well in fruit smoothies. These broths are relatively mild in flavor, and with all of the fruit, or say you're doing a green smoothie, the other flavors overwhelm more or less the mild bone broth or broth flavor. And by using bone broth as your base, you're introducing a liquid that's very rich in collagen. So you don't need to buy those fancy collagen powders or fancy gelatin powders. Just use bone broth as your base. Beef broth or beef bone broth works very well in green smoothies. It works very well in chocolate smoothies or coffee smoothies or mocha smoothies. And you're going to be very surprised when I tell you this, because I know when I discussed this in my previous video on ways to use bone broth, some of you were very surprised, but then when you did it, you wrote me back and said that it really worked very well, is that you can use fish bone broth, which is very inexpensive to make, because you're just going to ask your fishmonger for the head and the tail and some bones, and it only takes 45 minutes to make fish bone broth, and it's very mild in flavor. But you can add fish bone broth to green smoothies, and you're never going to notice it. So please give bone broth a try in your smoothies, and I would love to hear what you think. And I'll have all the information in the printable recipes, the different types of bone broth that I recommend for different types of flavored smoothies. Now, another option for liquid that I really like to use, as I mentioned earlier when we were talking about yogurt, is whey. Whey is another liquid that's very rich in probiotics. And the reason, you may be saying, why are you stressing probiotics? And the reason is, these are the things that are rich in good bacteria. And good bacteria is very good for feeding our good gut flora. And the healthier our guts, scientists tell us, the healthier we are. It's not just about gut health. When you have a healthy gut, you generally have a healthy body, and you have a better functioning immune system and are better able to fight off disease. So there are all types of things you can use for your liquid base. Kefir, kombucha, green tea, black tea, coffee, anything that you like that you feel is nutritious and nutrient dense and is going to supercharge your smoothie and really turn it into a superfood smoothie. Now, the liquid I'm going to add is a half a cup of whey, and this is actually whey that I strained off of some kefir. Now, I'm just going to start with a half a cup, but I can always add a little more liquid later if I feel I need to thin out my smoothie. But I generally find, as a rule of thumb, that starting with a half a cup of liquid is generally the perfect amount. Now, for my protein, I'm going to add a half a cup of cottage cheese. Now, if you want to know how to make your own homemade cottage cheese, which is very easy to do, I'll be sure to link to that video where I show you how to do that. And when it comes to protein choices, I really like to use real food as opposed to using protein powders. First of all, real food is generally less expensive than those protein powders, which can really be pricey. And number two, when we use real food, we don't need to worry about overtaxing our body with too much of something. because too much of anything can be hard on our body. And I always worry about those protein powders being too hard for our body to process, especially our kidneys. And the other thing I worry about with protein powders specifically is how were they made? Might the proteins have been damaged in the process when they were being made? So as a rule of thumb, I say just use real food. It's less expensive, and I think it's what our bodies are used to. And if you're going with something like cottage cheese or ricotta or yogurt or kefir, I find a half a cup is the perfect amount. If you're going with a nut butter, you can start with a tablespoon or even go up to 2 tablespoons. So I'm going to go ahead and just put this right down into our liquid. Now what I used was a cottage cheese that was made from whole milk. So that cottage cheese does have some fat in it. But to really make this smoothie satisfying and something that'll be filling and help keep us till it's time for lunch without any snacking, I am going to add a little additional fat. Now you could add a little avocado, but I don't want to add anything green to this particular smoothie. We will add avocado to a green smoothie, but for this, what I'm going to do is just add a little bit of olive oil. And since that is a full-fat cottage cheese, I'm just going to go ahead and add a teaspoon of olive oil. Nobody's going to notice that it's in there. But olive oil is so good for us, and I really like to try to work it into our diet, whether it's in a salad dressing or in a smoothie, whenever I can. Now once I get my liquid, my protein, and my fat into the blender, now it's the fun part where we get to move on to adding the fruits and vegetables. Now what I've got here is some banana that I've sliced and frozen. And as you can see, if I pick this up, it's all going to go down to the bottom, but I'll take a picture and overlay it. But basically this is what I do. I just go ahead and I slice up my fruit, whatever I'm using that's fresh, and I flatten it out in these plastic bags, and then I gently put it into my freezer. And then what's really nice is I've got this wonderful frozen fruit, and I can just take out how much I need or how much I want to add to my blender. Now none of these stuck together, but even if they did, just a gentle tap like that onto a cutting board will generally loosen them. Now speaking of these plastic bags, I want to give you a tip for those times when you want to make a smoothie, but you've got a busy morning or you leave very early in the morning and you need to have the bulk of everything ready to go so you can just throw it in your blender, add your liquid, and you're done. What you can do is have all of your fruits and vegetables frozen like this, but instead of just having them packed the way I do, you can make individual bags of the mixtures of the fruits and vegetables you like. And if you use that checklist that I talked about earlier, where you're keeping track of the different mixtures you're trying, then you'll be ready to know what you want to put into your bag. So you can put a little banana, some strawberries, some raspberries, some blueberries, whatever the case may be, along with whatever vegetables. You could have some cucumbers, you could have some celery, so on and so forth. And then you can just have all of that in your bag and you can just dump it right into your blender. And as far as your liquid ingredients go, you can just take a little mason jar like this and you can put in whatever liquid you're planning on using, whatever protein, a little extra fat if you're using an oil like I am. If you're using avocado, you can already have that cut up and frozen in with your other fruits and vegetables. And then in the morning, you can go ahead and just pour this right into your blender and then add your frozen ingredients. And I want to share something with you that I think is such a genius, and this is really and truly the quick and easy way to have a smoothie ready to go in the morning. Now, when I say genius, I'm not giving myself this credit. I'm actually giving somebody else credit. Many of you may already be familiar with a gal named Catherine McCord. She's the author of a line of cookbooks cookbooks that are directed at feeding children called Weelicious. It's very cute. And she also, I believe, has a website and a YouTube channel, and I'll be sure to link to that in the pinned comment that I'll put underneath this video. But she also has a book about smoothies, and it's called The Smoothie Project. And in the book, she talks about how feeding her son was somewhat difficult because he struggled with nausea, and she found that smoothies really helped him with that, or overcome that. So if that's something that you're dealing with, you may find that book very interesting, as well as if you are feeding children, you might find her Weelicious series very interesting. But she shares a tip in her book called The Smoothie Project that I thought was just sheer genius. She said, make all your smoothies, whatever smoothies you want to make for the week, say, and then get a jar, and these are just canning jars. I think in her book she might recommend canning jars. And she says to just fill them 3/4 of the way full, so you've got some nice headspace. And the reason you want some headspace is that after you make your smoothie and you fill your jar, it could be just a big batch of the same smoothie if you want to drink the same smoothie all week long, or if you want to make 5 different smoothies, 6, 7 different smoothies, whatever amount you need. But in any event, she says leave plenty of headspace, because then she recommends that you put the lid on it and you freeze it. Now, if you're going to freeze it, make sure you're using a jar that is freezer safe, and make sure that you do leave plenty of headspace. If you've seen my videos on bone broth, where I freeze my bone broth, I tend to like to use the French working glasses that have the plastic lids that you just press down. So if the bone broth expands past the amount of headspace that I left, which generally doesn't happen, I usually leave plenty of headspace, but if it does, it just pushes off the lid. So maybe if you're a little worried about doing this, you could always leave this a little loose. But in any event, she just says 3/4 of the way full, pop these in the freezer, then when each night, these are assuming these are all frozen now, each night take out one, put it in your refrigerator so that it'll start to defrost, and then in the morning all you need to do is give it a shake and you've got your smoothie. So I thought that was very clever, and I'll be sure to link to her book in the description below, along with her Weelicious series. I think she has so many wonderful ideas on feeding children, and very cute and clever things. Now, when it comes to adding frozen fruits and vegetables to our smoothie, I am basically making a single serving here, which has got about 1/2 cup of liquid, about 1/2 cup of the protein in the case of the yogurt or the cottage cheese and so on and so forth, or maybe you've got the 2 tablespoons or so of a nut butter, about a teaspoon of extra fat. Then when it comes to the fruits and vegetables, what I find is adding somewhere in the area of about 1 cup to maybe a little more than 1 cup. And to be honest with you, I don't always measure this precisely, because I am dealing with things that are frozen and there's a lot of airspace and so on and so forth. But what I do is just start with a couple of handfuls and eyeball what I think is somewhere in the area of about 1 cup of fruits and vegetables. So now with clean hands, I'm just going to go in here and just take a handful of frozen banana and go ahead and add that into my blender. Now I'm going to go ahead and pop this back into my freezer, and we'll go ahead and add the rest of the fruits and vegetables. Now, in addition to adding the banana, and I always like to add a little bit of banana to pretty much every smoothie, because it does give a nice little bit of sweetness as well as a nice smooth mouthfeel. But in addition to that, now I have my other fruits, and I'm making a berry smoothie here. So I've got quite a collection. I've got some raspberries, some strawberries, I've got a few cranberries, and everything's frozen. And I've got some of the Montmorency cherries, which are supposed to be, they're also frozen. They're supposed to be very good for helping if you have any arthritis pain or anything like that. They're also very useful if you need a little help sleeping. So they have some interesting qualities about them. And of course, all of the other fruits here are very rich in all types of phytonutrients that are wonderful for us. Now I also have some celery here for my vegetable, and that's a nice light green color, so it's not going to affect the color of the smoothie very much. And I like to add celery because it's very rich in potassium, and we're often low in potassium. We often have enough sodium but not enough potassium. And potassium helps to lower blood pressure if you have any trouble with high blood pressure. And so I always like to have a little bit of celery that I add to my fruit smoothies. And just speaking of minerals in general, I wanted to let you know that I have a video where I show you how to make an electrolyte powder, which then makes it very easy to make an electrolyte drink whenever you want, like a sports drink. And that's very rich in minerals, the electrolytes we need to replenish our bodies when we may be losing a lot of electrolytes, either through exercise or gardening work or just being outside when it's very hot and we're perspiring a lot. So you could even use that electrolyte powder in here. You could mix that with some water and use that as your liquid. But now let's go ahead and add all this in. I've been very generous. It's let's just say this is a very healthy cup of fruits and vegetables. Now we've got a lot of fiber from those fruits and veggies. However, I'm going to go ahead and add in a little extra fiber to help really have this keep me full. And what I've got here are a tablespoon of chia seeds. Now you have a lot of options that we talked about earlier that you can go ahead and add in if you wish, or you can leave out the extra fiber if you don't feel it's necessary, if the fruits and vegetables you are adding you feel are already very fibrous. Next, what we want to do is add in our superfood flavor boosters. Ginger would be great with this, vanilla would be great with this, any kind of citrus, which is what I'm going to add in, is also going to be great with this. Now I'm going to go ahead and just tap that zest right down into our blender. Boy, that smells so good. If you've ever zested citrus, it's just wonderful. Now I'm going to cut this lemon in half, and I'm going to add half of the lemon juice into my smoothie. I really like the extra boost of vitamin C, and I really like the tang that it adds. Now I'm going to save that other lemon for a green smoothie, because I'll give you a tip. Whenever you make a green smoothie, adding some citrus, especially like lemon or lime juice, really helps keep that bright green color that's so appetizing when making a green smoothie. And speaking of green smoothies, when you look to adding protein to it, you may see that there are protein powders that are based on peas. So it's not going to come, pea protein powder, but it's not going to come as any surprise to you when I tell you that I just recommend adding peas to your green smoothie. They actually add a nice little bit of sweetness and make for a very tasty green smoothie, and you've got the wonderful protein of the green peas. Now if you want, you can also scoop out the flesh and add that in as well. But whatever you do, don't throw this out. Add this to your scrap bag that you save in your freezer for making bone broth, and I hope you're already doing that, because this lemon can serve as a little bit of the acid that you need when you soak your bones, that help extract as much collagen out of them as possible. And this can be very helpful for those of you who don't like adding any alcohol to your bone broth or any apple cider vinegar. You can use citrus, and this can work very well. Well, I blended all of this for about a minute. I had my spatula handy just in case it needed a little help. I could have stopped it halfway through and just pushed things down the side, but after a couple of seconds it started whirling nicely, and I let it go about a full minute to get it nice and smooth. Now, if you're using one of those high-speed blenders like the Vitamix or the NutriBlender, it may go even faster. Now, whenever you're making any kind of smoothies like this, where fruit and vegetables are your base, and you really want the color of the particular fruit that you're using to shine through, whether maybe it's cantaloupe or blackberries or things like that, the vegetables that you can add, as I did here, are your lighter vegetables, like celery can work very well. Cucumbers can work very well. You can even remove the skins if you want, if you feel they're a little tough. Those hothouse raised cucumbers, the English cucumbers, they blend fairly well with the skins on and don't really impart too much color. Another wonderful option is cauliflower with its white color. That works very well. Now, if you have these wider straws, these work great for smoothies, but the little ones work well too. And you may even have those various washable type straws, which are nice, the reusable ones. Alrighty, let's give this a sip. That is so flavorful. You do not notice any of the olive oil. You just barely get a little bit of a hint of the celery, but really all of the fruits are shining through. And that little bit of lemon zest and lemon juice is perfect to just get everything to pop. Now let's make a green smoothie. Now for our green superfood smoothie, we're going to follow the same formula. We're going to make sure that we've got some protein, some fat, some carbohydrates, some fiber, and then some flavor boosters. And we're going to put everything into our blender in basically the same order. Now we're going to start with our liquid, and I've got some chicken bone broth here. So I'll go ahead and add that in, and I've got a half a cup, which I find always works well for giving me the right consistency that I'm looking for in a smoothie, given the amounts of the other ingredients that I'm using. Then for my protein, I've got a half a cup of peas, and so we'll go ahead and drop those in. Next, for our fat, I've got a half an avocado, and this is a half frozen avocado, and the peas were frozen too. Next, we're going to move on to our fruits and our veggies, and I'm going to just get a handful of banana here, because as I shared with you, I always like to add a little banana. This is frozen banana. It gives a nice sweetness and a nice smooth mouthfeel. Now for our first stage of fruits and veggies, what I'm going to be adding are some green grapes, some cantaloupe, and some cucumber. And again, everything is frozen, and I'm using those English cucumbers that have the relatively tender skins. So let's go ahead and add that in. We've got our grapes and our cantaloupe. This is going to be so refreshing. Next, what I've got here are our greens, and you can use any kind of greens that you want. These are just mixed salad greens, and as you can see from the cute little shape that they're in, I like to go ahead and freeze my greens, and this way I don't have to worry about them going bad or getting mushy or anything like that. And I just freeze them in a muffin tin. And then you can just take them out of the muffin tin and put them in a plastic bag, and then just take out as many as you want. And they break apart very easily. There won't be any trouble in the blender. But of course, you can certainly put in just a couple of handfuls of fresh greens. Now, when I make green smoothies, I like to use a variety of greens, and that's why I kind of like this mixed salad blend. I also like to use romaine lettuce, which is very rich in minerals. When it comes to spinach, I like to be a little careful because spinach is high in something called oxalates. And if you're sensitive to oxalates, you want to be careful with using too much raw spinach. Oxalates tend to form kidney stones in people who are susceptible to that. And so you may not want to, if you make green smoothies every day, you may not want to make them with spinach every day. It may just be a little too much for your body. And I definitely recommend that you do some research to educate yourself about oxalates. And I'll definitely put some links to some articles about them in the corresponding blog post that'll go along with this video. So I'm going to go ahead and put these in. I've just got about 4 little more or less handfuls, and as you see, they break apart very easily. Even when I was taking them out, they were just starting to fall apart. So they're not going to be any problem in the blender. But what's nice about this is if you like to buy those big plastic clamshells of greens, but you're worried that, you know, they may start to get a little past their prime, freezing them really works well. And it really works well at extending their life. Now, if you're concerned that your green smoothie may lean a little bit on the bitter side, you can add some sweetness. You know, as we talked about, I generally don't like to add any extra sweetness to a smoothie, and the berry one that we just did certainly didn't need any extra sweetness. We do have the banana in here that's going to lend some sweetness, along with the grapes and the the honeydew melon. However, if you do want to add some extra sweetness, a couple of dates in here would work great. Now, just to brighten everything, I'm going to go ahead and use that other half a lemon that I had left over from the berry smoothie for our little flavor blast add-in. Now, do we need to add extra fiber to this? Now, we do have a lot of things that are high in fiber. You've got the peas, the fruits, the greens, the cucumbers. So there's a lot going on in here, but I do like to add in a little bit of extra fiber to just help satiate me and keep me from snacking between meals. So this time what I've got here are flax seeds. You could certainly use the chia seeds, even the old-fashioned rolled oats works great in here, or wheat bran, oat bran, any of those options will work great. And I usually find just a tablespoon or 2 is perfect. And flax seeds are great because they're high in omega-3s, which are great for the brain and the heart. You know, this not only covers the category of adding additional fiber, it also is a superfood. And also what I've got here is some ginger. I really like a little ginger in green smoothies. And ginger is such a wonderful superfood. It is fantastic. It has anti-inflammatory properties, antiviral properties, antibacterial properties. It's just wonderful. And so I'm going to go ahead, and I just had just a small piece, wasn't maybe an inch long, and I just sliced it up to help with the whole blending process. Well, now we're all ready to go, so I'm just going to put this lid on, and I'm going to turn on my blender, and I'm going to start slow on stir and work my way up to liquefy. And this, like the berry smoothie, in just my old-fashioned blender, is probably going to take at least a minute to get nice and smooth. Alrighty, well, I blended this for a good 60 seconds to make sure that everything was really well combined. And I stopped it halfway through, since I did have this filled really almost to the top of the blender. I did stop halfway through, and I used my spatula here just to kind of mix things up, push things down the side, and mix things up a little. You probably wouldn't need to do this in one of the high-speed blenders. And then I added maybe about 1/8 of a cup of water, just a little bit extra liquid. You could add your bone broth. Also, too, I want to mention, if you're not ready for using bone broth in a green smoothie, you can certainly use just plain water. You could use half water and half apple juice would be very nice. You could also try green tea. So you have a lot of options. Well, let's pour this into our glass and give it a taste. The aroma with that ginger in there is just wonderful. That's terrific. You know, sometimes you think, oh, a green smoothie, how's it going to be? But that is so flavorful. Adding the honeydew melon and that little bit of banana really makes this very flavorful. And I really like the idea of adding the lemon juice. It just helps keep everything a really bright, vibrant, and appetizing green color. Now, in the printable recipe, in addition to the master recipe where I go over the simple formula of 5 category ingredients and 5 steps to put them all together to make your superfood smoothie, I'll also have the recipe for exactly how I made this green smoothie, as well as how I made the berry smoothie, plus some other ideas for combinations for additional smoothies. And now, if you would like to learn how to make various ingredients to use when making your super smoothies, your superfood smoothies, be sure to click on this video over here where I show you how to make bone broth, how to make your own cottage cheese, ricotta cheese, yogurt, all sorts of things like that that are perfect for smoothies. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.